Ulavinaka, everyone! As introduced, I'm Kavita Peterson, and I'm delighted to be a part of the proceedings today, even though I can't be there in person at this time. I'm truly hoping that this conference is only the beginning of a shift towards more global majority-centered heritage programming going forwards. Today, I'm going to introduce my explorations into the potential of radically reinventing Western ethnographic museum spaces as contact zones designed specifically for the benefit of resident ethnic diaspora communities. I would like to begin by contextualizing my research, followed by an analysis of my 2 case studies. I will conclude with some reflections on how examples such as these might inform Western ethnographic museum praxis through the introduction of a new contact zone model in service of cultural diaspora. Western ethnographic institutions, generally understood today to have been a product of the European colonial project, have been increasingly struggling to maintain their relevance in the wake of shifting cultural paradigms. So poor are the optics of the Ethnographic Museum that even new establishments such as the Humboldt Forum in Berlin have also found themselves plagued by intense scrutiny at every stage of their development. Ethnographic museums around the West have attempted in various quick-fix ways to improve their reputations, from rebranding as world museums to investing in all manner of artist interventions. Adopting the language of decolonization in their manifestos, these museums often nevertheless have lukewarm results when it comes to satisfying the communities they purport to represent. I'm hoping that my research will serve to illustrate how the representational strategies of global majority ethnographic institutions might provide a better model for reinventing the Western Ethnographic Museum in comparison to existing Western exhibitionary paradigms. Literary scholar Mary Louise Pratt coined the term contact zone to denote social spaces where cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, often in contexts of highly asymmetrical relations of power, such as colonialism, slavery, or their aftermaths. When discussing the concept of the contact zone with regards to ethnographic museums, a great deal of the discourse to date has tended to focus narrowly on the contact zone between presumed white curators in the Western world and non-white or minority group communities of origin abroad. In my research, I wished to move away from these analyses and propose a new form of contact zone to revitalize the Western Ethnographic Museum, that of community of origin to community of origin. My ethnographic case study research drew on the concept of the contact zone to conduct a museological close reading of 2 recently developed ethnographic exhibitions of Pacifica and African heritage respectively, both designed by and targeting communities of origin. The Fiji Museum in Suva, Fiji, and the John K. Randle Center for Yoruba Culture and History in Lagos, Nigeria. The former was established as a colonial-era institution in service of an elite audience, but was completely reconceptualized to become a museum with the local community at its core. The latter is an entirely new facility responsible for an exhibition that centers, celebrates, and dignifies Yoruba history, resilience, and artistic excellence. The data collected from the sites comprises ethnographic observations in the case of the Fiji Museum and documentation of each exhibition, including websites and background papers. The Fiji Museum in Suva was formed by a colonial-era Fijian society in 1908 and formally inaugurated as a statutory body of the colonial government in 1929. Governed and managed by a long line of white colonial officials, even the official website of the Fiji Museum is not shy about discussing its past visitor demographics, stating, "For a long time, the museum served as a center for an erudite minority. The majority of local people did not show much interest." This admission in itself is indicative of a desire to more broadly serve the Fijian public. The most recent incarnation of the Fiji Museum opened to the public in December 2022, after 2.5 years spent completely reconceptualizing the museum behind closed doors. The renewed museum aims to create an overwhelming sense of pride among our diverse communities in Fiji, while remaining mindful of the impact of climate change and the continued disasters which threaten our shores. Although in parts the museum's reliance on objects collected by white colonial subjects is still apparent, in particular the use of colonial photography and illustrations to complement its displays. The new permanent exhibition otherwise exudes a distinctly Pacifica voice. Care has been taken to produce video materials containing the contemporary stories and insights of locals and elders from various ethnic backgrounds. Information about cultural objects uses inclusive language and often includes simple instructions on how the object is made. The section about climate change is decorated with quotes from today's generation of Fijian sailors and fisher people about the importance of protecting the ocean, as well as evocative art pieces by contemporary Fijian artists. A clear contact zone for the ethnically diverse locals of Fiji is being facilitated within the exhibition space, with museum visitors invited to add their own voices to the chorus. While it has been common in the past for Western representations of Fijian culture to emphasize objects of violence and cannibalism over other aspects of culture, this exhibition instead uses the ocean, often viewed by Pacifica communities as a central pillar of their diverse cultures, as the main theme from which to link other aspects of both past and present everyday Fijian life, including intercommunal diplomacy, language, and customs. Objects belonging to British colonial officials are also historicized into the exhibition, but their incorporation is marginal, and colonization is not presented as a milestone in a linear progression towards modernity, as it might be in a classical Western institution. Also notable is the lack of human remains on display, which is not to say that human specimens are not represented in the museum at all. In fact, in 2002, the discovery of Fiji's oldest lapita skeleton led to a painstaking process of recreating what the person it belonged to might have looked like. Rather than preserving the skeleton for posterity after this groundbreaking research, the Fiji Museum chose instead to rebury the skeleton in the same place it had been found, only now in a dignified coffin. In its stead in the museum is the world's only recreation of a lapita person, a woman named Mana, who smiles benevolently back at her curious descendants. Overall, through connecting and embedding Fijian objects with living culture, be it through audiovisual storytelling, contemporary art, or the great centering force of the ocean, the voices of these objects can still clearly be heard in the Fiji Museum. In 1928, during British colonial rule in Nigeria, West African medical doctor and later co-founder of the first political party in Lagos, John K. Randle, established a public pool in Lagos to allow locals to learn how to swim. Decades later, the once popular site fell into disuse and lay dilapidated for years until 2017, when the government of Lagos tasked a local architectural team with redeveloping the site as part of local urban regeneration initiatives to transform the greater region into a cultural hub. Reconfigured from the ground up, the very design of the upcoming John K. Randle Center for Yoruba Culture and History shows deep reverence for Yoruba craftsmanship and philosophy, from the shapes employed in the structures to the aesthetics and textures conveyed by the forms therein, such as the Yoruba weaving tradition. Rather than just restoring the public pool of the original site, the new, unapologetically Yoruba Cultural Center also includes a library, performing arts space, and state-of-the-art new permanent exhibition on Yoruba culture. Interestingly, and almost like an unspoken challenge, the modern complex just so happens to be located across the road from a more classically Western ethnographic institution, the National Museum Lagos, established in the 1950s by white British archaeologist Kenneth Murray during his time as director of the colonial administration's Department of Antiquities. Nigerian writer Roland Abiodun was brought onto this project to lead a mostly African curatorial team in developing the exhibition and its narrative. Speaking on the museological approach for the permanent exhibition, Chief Architect Seon Oduwole has said, "One of the things that we wanted to do here was to interrogate museology as a construct and ask the question about why the Western model doesn't work within the African context, and how we can create a space that isn't a museum in the traditional sense, but is more like a theatre of living memory." In service of creating such a theatre, the permanent exhibition aims to be necessarily open-ended, refraining from presenting a linear view of history, and providing opportunities for visitors to imagine the future. A feast for the senses, bright colors and patterns frame cultural objects both old and new, and visitors are bathed in soundscapes at various parts of their exhibition journey, covering topics from Yoruba spirituality to modern fashion. Not only are visitors to the exhibition exposed to the rich tradition of Yoruba storytelling and music, but they're encouraged to tell their own stories in a dedicated space at the end of the exhibition path. In this way, visitors become part of the exhibition themselves and are encouraged to feel a sense of belonging in the space, regardless of their background. Although the centre's website states its hope that it will serve to provide a vital injection of tourism to Lagos, it appears to also predict that cultural diaspora will form a significant part of this tourist demographic, viewing the site as a place of remembrance and reconnection for Yoruba and African people from Cuba, Brazil, Haiti, America, and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of Nigeria. Similar to the Fiji Museum detailed above, of high importance to the John K. Randle Center is that Yoruba culture is presented not as a singular entity, but a multifaceted identity that has been shaped by centuries of history and dispersed far from Nigeria into all corners of the globe. The zone of contact in this space, then, is not limited to local stakeholders, but extends as well to Black African descendants of all backgrounds, who often come with their own family histories of displacement and cultural genocide. Thus, the feelings of belonging and connection invoked in certain areas of the exhibition space may ultimately take on greater weight, as the descendants of those robbed of their identity and sent into slavery may feel like they have finally found their way back home. It is quite easy to see how, despite offering universal appeal, including to international tourists, the target audience of each of the museums described is predominantly a local one and curated with a local gaze. It is also apparent how the purpose of the Ethnographic Museum has been interpreted anew in these reconceptualized institutions, with an eye towards future cultural revitalization and stability. Meanwhile, in the Western world, although it has been over 2 decades since the publication of Stuart Hall's seminal paper on the post-nation, which brought diaspora heritage into the spotlight, Western ethnographic collections still appear to be largely presented as static cultural relics from far-flung regions across the ocean, rather than objects with their own migratory stories to tell, or which might have continued utility for diaspora communities residing in the nations where the objects are held. In Arts of the Contact Zone, Mary Louise Pratt makes a salient point about the potential danger of the contact zone for marginalized communities. Where there are legacies of subordination, groups need places for healing and mutual recognition, safe houses in which to construct shared understandings, knowledges, claims on the world that they can then bring into the contact zone. In the context of diaspora visitors to the Ethnographic Museum as it is currently operated in the West, there would appear to be a distinction made between the contact zone of the museum exhibit and a place for diaspora to engage in healing and mutual recognition. However, does this need to be the case? Is there no room for the Western Ethnographic Museum, with its long history as a vehicle for harm and oppression, to become such a space for healing, as in my 2 case study museums? Of course, it goes without saying that we cannot hope to achieve any of our decolonizing goals in any institution where there is the continued dominance of white hegemony within its bones. In this sense, a case needs to be made on an institutional level for why this transformative, living approach to museology is a valuable investment for the Ethnographic Museum. What better way to do this than by observing the successes of the communities in the global majority in curating their own collections locally and engaging in meaningful relationship building? As we can see from the examples of the John K. Randle Center in Lagos and the Fiji Museum in Suva, communities of color are not afraid of the Ethnographic Museum. Rather, we are innovatively seeking to transform them into spaces that speak to us rather than about us. The time has come to heal the Western ethnographic institution by tapping into its unique potential as a means for asserting and celebrating the vernacular identities of cultural diaspora. The work is already starting to flourish across the ocean, and now it is time to listen and learn. Binaka Vakalevu. Thank you very much for your time.